On the spiritual path, the main thing, at first, that we are trying to train ourselves to accomplish is the inner discrimination between the real and the unreal, called in Sanskrit viveka. So discrimination between the real and the unreal. The real, or the truth within, is again the soul, or what is the nature of consciousness. That's part of the truth within us. The unreal, again, is what we call personality or ego. So anything that has to do with ego is to be considered the unreal or the non-self. And we have to try to become very skilled at actively knowing the difference between, again, the real and the unreal. Now, a very great hindrance upon the spiritual path is the characteristic of someone who is oversensitive. And oversensitivity and the requirement that other people think like you, agree with you, wanting to, for example, censor people who do not think the way we think, or the desire to, impose to other people a certain way to speak or to address us, or cultivating a very deep sense of victimhood, for example. It's a form of oversensitivity, promoting an exaggerated sense of identification with racial groups of any kind, or any demographics, or anything like that. Those are a very great hindrance upon the spiritual path, because all of these things, and especially the manifestation of oversensitivity or over-triggeredness, we could say maybe, all of these things are characteristics of an overblown or overgrown ego. It is the characteristic of a consciousness which is too attached and over-identified with those ego or personality traits, which again have nothing to do with the nature of consciousness. So the goal of the spiritual path again is, one of the first goals of the spiritual path is discrimination, or being able to know the difference between the real and the unreal. Whereas in identity politics or wokeness, what is being done is overemphasizing and encouraging and promoting the characteristics of the non-self. So these things, and the over-promoting of these things is blatantly anti-spiritual, because it goes against the first and very primordial and very important goal of, cultivating a sense of knowing the difference between the real and the unreal. So, with all that in mind, I would simply say that any truly spiritually minded person will always cultivate a sense of dispassion and calmness towards the opinions of others, towards any opinion that may differ from one's own. Such a person will not be triggered. Such a person will not try to call out so-called microaggressions towards himself or herself. Such a person will not and never cultivate a sense of victimhood. In other words, such a person will take responsibility for one's own life and one's own life decisions and their consequences. The reason behind all this, and it's very important to understand, is that such a person will cultivate a sense of discrimination between the real and the unreal within, and cultivate an emphasis upon the real. In other words, consciousness itself. So, of course, the result of that over time will be increased consciousness. Increased consciousness, meaning, in other words, increased light. That's why sometimes it is called enlightenment, which is gradual. Consciousness itself is like light, whereas the opposite of consciousness, of course, is more like darkness, ignorance, not knowing, not realizing, not being aware of. So the emphasis upon the real, of course, is the path towards increased consciousness, increased light, and increased benefits that come from the light. And this is a very, very deep subject in itself, and very esoteric. I will do some videos on this, more on this later. But what I want to emphasize here is that emphasis upon the real is emphasis upon consciousness, and so emphasis upon light, more light in one's life, and therefore more light in society. Whereas emphasis upon the unreal, emphasis upon the non-self, emphasis upon, therefore, those characteristics which are natural part of the non-self. If emphasis is put on these things, as in wokeness and identity politics, what is being increased is what is not light, what is not consciousness, and that which veils or hinders the expression of consciousness. So the consequences of cultivating any sense of increased identification or exaggerated identification with any aspects of the non-self, we must know, and we must realize and understand that there is no benefit anywhere for that. And nowadays, it seems the culture in general seems to be pushing for more identification with the characteristics of the non-self, and so we are going towards a states of consciousness promoted by culture, which are going towards something darker. We're not becoming more enlightened as a society right now. Now we will individually and collectively go towards more enlightened states of consciousness when we put the emphasis on the real within, and this will happen when we will cultivate way more the distinction, again within, between the real and the unreal. And one thing about soul reality, one thing about the nature of our consciousness is the fundamental brotherhood amongst all humans. Human souls must be viewed as brothers because this is a fundamental part of their nature. This is the truth about soul reality, is that all humans are brothers. So in society, this expression of the true brotherhood of souls must express itself as brotherhood in spite or despite personal differences, because those personal differences will remain, of course, but emphasis will be put on the real, which comes as the expression of brotherhood.